Jamie McMurray has won in all three divisions, trucks, Xfinity, and Cup. Now, if I'm wrong, you stop me. Yeah. So you have ran 799 NASCAR starts. That's a lot of racing. 584 Cup races, 190 Xfinity races, 25 truck races. That's 799 NASCAR starts. Okay. In the Cup Series, 7 Cup wins. Now, this is where it gives me goosebumps. Tells me how competitive you were. 169 top 10s, 11 poles, or as we say in dirt racing, 11 quick time. Yeah, I love that. Xfinity, 8 wins, 70 top 10s, 70, 3 poles. Then you ran 25 truck races, got a truck win, 6 top 10s, 3 poles. Now, that's just a baseline. Now I want to celebrate where I always teased with you. I said, Jamie, you never win a normal race. Listen to the races that Jamie has won. Now, this is just highlighting everyone. First of all, he's the 2003 NASCAR Cup Rookie of the Year. And now comes the big boys. 2010 Daytona 500 winner. 2010 Brickyard 400 winner at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Man, this one had to be hard. The 2013 Sprint All-Star race winner. That's like a 6-lap dash. That's getting it on. That's getting it on. And then this tells me, this comes back to like go-karting in Daytona. The 2015 Rolex Daytona 24-hour overall winner. That had to be wild in one of those cars. So Jamie, now that I've kind of said all that, and you've had a chance to listen, what were you thinking about as I was reading off all those amazing stats?
So I would tell you that when you talk about the All-Star race, like a 6-lap dash, the year that I won that, the rules for that are so complicated. They change it every year. Like you don't even, and so we ran all of the segments, and I don't think I won any of the like first 3 segments. And I remember I got to come down pit road second, and it was how you came off of pit road. And I think I came out second also. But that was the year that we had the most downforce in NASCAR, like these massive spoilers and these huge front splitters. Like the cars just generated an insane amount of grip. We had like 900 horsepower. I don't know. It was a ton of horsepower. And I remember when I got the lead in that race, it was a 10-lap shootout. I remember I got the lead in that race, and you've run Charlotte. And I remember driving into turn 3, and I lifted for like a half a second, and I floored it, and I drove to the bottom of the racetrack, and I was like, "Oh my God, is this thing stuck?" And I ran 10 laps like that, just like qualifying laps. And I remember as it was like counting down, I'm like, "My God, I'm gonna get $1 million." I'm like, this is unbelievable, and I'm like, if the caution doesn't come out, it's gonna work. And it didn't. And that was, I mean, I would say of what the wins you rattled off, that's not the big one, but like that was something that stuck out to me as you were talking about that, just because I can, there's a few moments in my career that I hope I never forget. Like I
Yeah.
can close my eyes. One of them is coming off turn 4 for the Daytona 500. I can see the checkered
Wow.
flag. I can see Dale Jr. behind me, and I remember that feeling, that sensation, and I'm like, I hope I never forget that. Another one is coming off of turn 2 at Indy for the Brickyard. And that straightaway is like 7 miles long, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
just wide open forever, right? I just remember, I'm like, if I don't blow a tire out, I'm gonna win this thing. Like it's and I say that race because like of my 7 cup wins, 4 of them were on super speedways, and you don't know you've won until it's over. And sometimes even when it's over, you don't know if you won. And the feeling of getting to know you had won for like 40 seconds and kind of savoring that, I mean, like they're just like those are memories that I hope that they never go away.
Do you think it's a coincidence? What I mean, sometimes we're riding along in our car or truck and it's just us, and we start thinking, have you ever, was there ever a moment when all this was kind of over, in the last 5 years that you go, gosh, I wonder why I won the big ones? I think it's just unbelievable. It's almost like God gifted you, here, let me lay it on a silver platter for you. In your second NASCAR Cup start ever, you're subbing for the injured Sterling Marlin, and I still feel this way when I wrote this. You literally shocked the racing world. You led 96 laps at Charlotte, and you won. So, what do you remember about that?
That was a really interesting weekend because they being the team. Remember Tony Glover, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Greatest guy ever. Glover was it was like a co-crew chief. It was he and Lee McCall on that car, and I told Glover we'd run Talladega the week before, and he was like, "Hey, we got a good setup for Charlotte," and I was like, "Well, I hope so, because that's not a very good track for me."
A little
I'm like,
cocky.
I'm like, I don't have. I was like, Glover, that's my worst track, and he's like, no, he's like, when you get in these
Oh
cars,
wow.
it all makes sense. I'm like, okay. So we went to the track on that Friday because you used to do practice and qualifying on Friday. We did practice Kenny, and I was the slowest car in practice. I went out and did my. I remember. Well, I'd never driven a Cup car. Well, I'd driven on Talladega, but they have no power at Talladega. We went to Charlotte, and that was like that 900 horsepower time. And I remember leaving pit road, and I'm like, I've never sat in anything this fast in my whole life. I'm like, oh my God, my eyes were just like huge because I'm like, it's just so fast. And so we were doing all we did were qualifying runs. And I'm pretty sure I was the slowest car. And Glover came over to me. You sit in your car. I come in after a qualifying run. I'm sitting in the car. They jack it up, and he put the window net down. And Glover's like, "Well, little buddy," he's like, "I think you're right." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You're not very good here, are you?" And I'm like,
Oh
"I
my
told
God.
you." I told you. And so listen, you'll find this interesting, I think. He was like, "You got to go around the bump in turn 3. There's like a patch over there and you got to go around it." And I remember looking at him very dazed because I'm like, I have no idea what he's talking about. I've never seen a bump. I don't know what he means. Well, it rained out qualifying, so I didn't have to qualify. And
Thank
the
God.
next day, yeah, thank God. The next day, I was in the Busch Xfinity car, and we started the race. And you, if I don't know if you remember, but when you used to get out of the Cup car and get in the Xfinity car, it was like 10 miles an hour slower, but it felt like you had no power. It just everything happened slow. And I remember we started the race, and I drove into turn 3, and I'm like, oh my God, there's a bump right there. I see it, and I started going around it. And I should have won the Busch race that day, I think. Like it was my motor blew up, but I had a really fast car in the Busch race. Well, then we got to go do happy hour in the Cup car, and I was pretty fast because I was going. They're like, "Oh, you're going around the bump now," and I'm like, "Well, I don't really want to tell them that I didn't know there was a bump there for a
Yeah.
while." But it just all clicked, and I mean, no expectation of being able to win that race. But yeah, like it was. Yeah, that's a fun memory. Yeah.
When that was over, and you're going home, at Charlotte, we always live around that area. In those days, you got 200,000 people. Well, maybe not when you won. Definitely that kind of stopped around 2006, but it was always hard to get out of the Charlotte Motor
Yeah.
Speedway. When you won that race and you're trying to make your way to wherever you live, which is locally, uh, what happened after the race? Did you go anywhere? Did you go home? What did you think? Did the phone calls start the next day? How did it transfer?
I All I remember after the race was being in victory lane, and they put Sterling on a phone call with me, like a cell
Oh
phone.
wow, wow.
And I remember, and I haven't watched any of that. I haven't watched that back in forever, so I don't know what I said. But I remember in the moment being like, "Be humble," like, because this guy's at home with a broken neck, like, and you got in his car, and there's no driver. I don't care what any driver says, everybody wants to see the next guy fail in their car. Like it's
Absolutely.
just the reality of it. And I'm like, here I am, a guy that's never won a Busch race. I've never won a truck race. I get in Sterling's car. This car's led the championship up to this point, and I win, and he's at home with a broken neck. And I just remember like I just remember like I trying to come across like just grateful because I was, but also I was thinking more about Sterling than I was about myself in that moment. You know.
Yes.
That's all I remember afterwards. I don't remember the car ride home. I don't remember any of that.
Yeah. That's an awesome moment to remember. I want to talk to you about that scenario. I felt that. Uh, I'm driving in an Xfinity race at Darlington. Steve Park gets hurt, and my career's going okay. But Steve Park gets hurt in the Xfinity race. They asked me to drive the Pennzoil car. It saves my career. I mean, the very next day I start dead last, and I'm driving this Pennzoil car straight to the front, all the way up close to the
Hmm.
lead, and it breaks. But then Mark Martin said something to me, and this is where I'm getting with this. I started set quick time at Rockingham, run second. So what you just mentioned, Mark Martin said to me, he looked at me, he goes, Herman, you got to have a good car in the Cup Series. And boy,
Yeah.
it just shocked me, like, oh my God, will I ever get in a good Cup car? Because if I don't get in a good Cup car, then my career will never be what I want it to be.
Right.
So in that moment that you're talking about with Sterling, did it ever register you that, hey, I got to have a good car? And then getting hooked up with Chip and Roush. Tell me about, did you ever think you were so great that you could just drive through an ill handling car?
Oh, no, I would say confidence would have been my weakness my whole career was, thinking that I had the ability to to do it. I mean, I really only had 1 year in my whole career, 2010, that every single weekend when I showed up, I'm like, we might win this weekend. Like there were a few tracks that we went to that we weren't very good at, but for the most part, every weekend I felt that way. But I would say there was not really any other year that I mean, like, I just felt like I didn't deserve to be there most of the time. Like, it's just the reality of it because I wanted to do better.
You are an incredibly talented race car driver. You're very good. That's why you won the 2015 Rolex at Daytona as a team driver. So
Yeah.
it's a fact that you're a very talented race car driver. So let's fast forward right now to these days. Um, I'd like to spend more time with you, but I know you're working
Yeah.
for Fox. We're going to get to that,
I know.
but
I think it's so funny because you're interviewing me, and then in about an hour and a half, I'm gonna be interviewing somebody else.
yeah,
It's like,
we're paying it forward. We're
yeah.
paying it forward. Okay, so now we go from your era, where if this cup car is not right, I don't have any chance. You know,
Right.
I got to have. I in your day, if your cup team did not have an advantage, you most likely weren't going to win. So the bodies had to be put on right. And if they weren't on right, you were pushing, you were loose. And now here we are today where everybody's car is identical. And now we're seeing guys, listen, he's a good race car driver. Michael McDowell, he's winning now. But it's almost like these guys had to get into equal cars to show their talent.
Yeah,
Tell me
I think
about
that's
this.
no, I think that's so fair. The one thing that I loved about the past is that if you were way off, you talk about the bodies. I mean, you just would cut the whole body off and start over. And you know what I
That
mean? Like,
day,
I mean, that's what you did. Yeah. And I mean and it was a fun time because you might struggle at Charlotte and they're like, well, we're going to put a different body build on. And it could change everything about the car, right? I mean, it's a totally different car. Where today, it's a pretty small box that all those guys have to work with. But I mean, I just think that and I'm not as optimistic as you, I don't think, in life, but I'm super optimistic that the same people still win. Like you put Kyle Larson in a car in 2000, he's going to win. You put him in the car in 20 more years, he's probably still going to win because he's just a
yeah,
really good driver and he does all the small things. I mean, he's really talented, but he does everything correct and even though they're in a smaller box now, you just still see the same. I mean, you do have every once in a while a little bit of an outlier, but the same good drivers still win.
That really showed up with Kyle Busch in the truck race, or was it the Xfinity race at Atlanta? He
Truck
was
race, yeah.
leading that. Yeah, he was leading that truck race, and they were just all over him. And he had to mirror drive more than he did front. I
He,
think that was
yeah.
incredible.
Well, when I watched the truck race with him, and I loved that type of racing, the drafting and all that. And this isn't a to put anyone else down, but you could tell Kyle's experience. Like
Oh yeah.
you could just watch and you're like, he's having so much fun right now because it's like, it's like going to the kart track and you get to have the fastest kart, right? I mean, like he was
He knew what
thinking like,
moves to make.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was thinking 20 seconds ahead of everybody else. And it was I got to assume that he had to just that had to be as much fun as he could have in a vehicle. That was good.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay. Um, you had an incredible Cup career, NASCAR Cup career, Xfinity trucks. Wow, 799. Why didn't you stop at
I
800?
don't know. I don't know. Todd Bodine wore me out for like 3 years at the studio. Like, go run one more race. I'm like, I just don't care. Who cares? It's just a number.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he did. I remember he
That's
ran.
why he was wearing me out because he went to, I don't know, was it, what number do you want to get to? 1,000 or something? I don't know what it was.
It was a good number.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah. I'm like, I
he
don't know. I didn't even know I was at 799.
yeah. Well, I didn't know it either until I added it all up,
Yeah.
and there it was. But it is cool. And NASCAR, Jamie. NASCAR is going to promote what they want to promote. And so maybe 15, 20 years ago, they started doing that.
Yeah.
Mark Martin has 1,000 Cup starts.
Yep.
Michael Waltrip. They started talking about the totality of how many times you put that helmet on, how many times you got in that race car. But I mean, we're just rounded off. Does your ass ever feel like you ran 800 NASCAR races?
No, it's really crazy to me when you say that to think that I've raced that much because I don't. I mean, I remember like there was a time when I feel like there was an era from like 2002 to 2005 that it wasn't cool to run the Bush race if you were a Cup driver. You remember that?
Mm,
Like I feel like Jeff Gordon, he never ran the Bush. You know what I mean? Like if he did it, it was special, and he was probably getting paid a gazillion dollars to do it.
yeah.
But it was like, but then there was that time like with Harvick and Carl, Kyle Busch, like all of a sudden they were just running all of them, and then it was like, well, it's okay now. Like I don't know. I just remember, and so then I did a few more, like especially at Roush, like they had all those Xfinity teams that you could go run each weekend. And it was fun to get to do both of them each weekend. I loved getting to do that. I mean, you get to do two races in one weekend. It was awesome.
Yeah, and I think it's cool because you're a lot younger than me. You're 48, I'm 61. In my era, I was racing against Dale Earnhardt Sr., Harry Gant, Mark
Yeah.
Martin, and the legendary Winn-Dixie Ford. So, like, it was at that time, it was cool. I like what you said here, and I kind of forgot about that. It was a necessity in my era, and then it wasn't because Jeff Gordon wasn't doing it. And then all of
Right.
a sudden it became a necessity. So that's what they mean when we have to pay attention to history. It repeats itself.
It does for sure. Yeah, I mean I don't know, like if I could go back, I would have run more Xfinity races. Like I would have done that more weekends. But then as it, like around I don't remember 2013, 14, budgets got tight and there just wasn't the money for everybody to go. I mean,
Yes.
there was a time that I mean, if you wanted to run one you could, and then budgets just got tighter and there just wasn't the partnerships to go do all that.
Yeah. And then Kyle Busch ruined it for everybody. He
I
won
know.
so much. The
It was
fans
unbelievable.
complained so much. Kyle Busch does not deserve to be in Xfinity. He's too
Right.
good. So then they outlawed it.
Yeah,
And
I
what
viewed
is it?
that differently though, Kenny. I when I was like my first couple years of Xfinity, I loved it when the Cup guys were there because you get to
Me
race with
too.
them. Like
Oh,
I'm
I'm the
like,
same way you are.
man, like I loved it when Matt Kenseth would come race. Like you're like, well, that's who I want to race on Sunday. So yeah, I want him to be in the race today. I thought it was great.
Yeah, and this is a conversation between two racers. My
Yeah,
favorite win of my life was I looked up in the mirror at Richmond. Of course, I was nervous as all get out, but I was looking at Dale Senior's bubble goggles and Mark Martin, and
it's crazy.
my favorite win. So that's I agree with you. Just an example of
Yeah.
when you outrun those guys, it
Yeah, it was
matters.
more special. Yeah.